Gladringer, at the Temple of the Hunt, the 12th of Ascension. That night they gathered in a corner of the courtyard of the Temple of the Hunt, beside the stables. With trusted Penguin at the helm, having returned from his visit to his extended family of tame bros in town, they set braziers and iron cooking racks and benches out on the stones and prepared for a stew. The temple assistants brought them dried venison stored from previous hunts, along with bread and fruits and pies. Duras and his crew made room for Stepan and Erin between Penguin and Green Guerdin. The sling on his arm rebounded. Guerdin turned to Stepan. The priestess put salves and ointments on it, and say that because of the enchanted poultice as you and the lamp used, that I need wear it only a few more days. My thanks, Blackheart, he said happily. Wasn't a thing, Stepan said with a shrug. That wasn't an easy job I asked you to do. Not with 3 of your fellows lost in the bargain. A steep price. We weren't doing it for you, Blackheart, said Green Guerdin. We were doing it with you. He tapped his fingers of his good hand to his forehead in a quick salute at Erin, as Penguin handed her some onions to peel and cut. She raised her eyebrows in slight surprise, but then nodded back at Guerdin in approval. Gauze and Flynn joined the circle, with Gauze's unruly beard now trimmed to respectable order, and Flynn clean-shaven, revealing how emaciated his face really looked. They both seemed in better spirits than they had during the short journey to the temple, with Flint in something of a bemused daze. I'm fine. I don't really remember anything, he said, when asked how he was doing. It's all a blur, and I think I will be happy if it stays that way. He waved his hand lazily in the air, as though he was waving smoke away from his eyes. Gus stared at Flint for a moment, then turned to the rest of them. Ian's also awake, and clear-headed at least, he reported. He still has weeks of recovery under the care of the priestess and priests here before he is ready to either rejoin us or be moved somewhere else. A great sorrow lies upon him. But he was able to talk, and said greetings and thanks to all of you who helped to rescue him and us. Erin looked down and stared at the coals in the braziers as Duras's crew grunted and nodded in response. And she worked on the onions. That's where the impulse to tear up is coming from, she assured herself. The stew was well along, and its savory bouquet flavoring the evening air around them, when Josephus arrived leading a group of 5 men. Durasa and Stepan and Gauze rose to greet them, mingling and exchanging greetings, while the rest nodded and waved and grunted from their seats. The newcomers all wore faded brown and black leathers, and rough boots and tricorn hats, and carried daggers and hunting swords. Each bore a brass sigil on the breasts of their leather coats, a crown of laurels circling a fox's head. She recognized a few of them, particularly the oldest, a Danian with a creased face burned by sun and wind, a salt and pepper beard, and full head of close-cropped white hair. Old Emerald Tarlan saw her looking at him and walked over. She stood and took his offered hand in a firm grasp. I remember you, he said gruffly but warmly. Erin from Berin, all right. You were with Blackheart in Hartford. I heard tell that your other companions were not as fortunate to survive your expedition. Afraid not, Master Emerald, she said. Things did not go all that well. They never do. Not in the Bale Mall, he said with a sympathetic nod. The 2 other men she recognized, Pyle Garthing and Corwin Bergain, also came over and shook her hand. They introduced her to the 2 she didn't recognize, the young brothers Barrett and Helle Rook, all of them wardens in the service of the new lord of Cardiff, Naeras Gire. They all spoke to her with an odd deference, and she wondered if Josephus had been telling tales. It wasn't the tales she'd expected he might tell, however. Josephus turned to Duras and the others, as the warden settled in around the braziers with them. You may be surprised to learn
that if what I have just heard in Girdiv is correct, that our friends Blackheart and Erin were amongst those that aided Lord Arduin Orwain on his escape from Therapolimangi after he killed Roderick Argar.
There was a general round of grunts and exclamations of surprise.
The Titans have been slow and piecemeal from the east, but the story's becoming clearer passed from bard to bard, and now both of them are named in the telling, along with Gilgwig Liedane of the Sleight of Hand, an infamous brothel of that city, and some of the crew chiefs of the Great Guild, Badmo Berry and John Dee and Peterwin Grim. They all aided Lord Aldrin as he fought his way out of the city.
But Arduin didn't kill Roderick Urgor. Erin was about to speak, but Stepan coughed her eye and shook his head. You failed to mention this before, Blackheart, Durasa said with an upraised eyebrow and a small smile. I'm disappointed we did not rate your confidence in this, given what we've all been through together. Stepan shrugged apologetically.
We've all been a bit busy, yes? Old Emerald frowned. Was Lord Arduin part of your expedition? Does this mean that he has perished in the Bale Mall?
Stepan nodded. I'm afraid so. It was a general outcry of disappointment from the gathered men. Durasha shook his head. We will have to offer prayers for him then, unless his 7 days are already up. The last of his 7 days was yesterday, Stepan said. Was it also recent? Erin wondered to herself. We have been busy. Ah, well, his judgment has come and passed then, Durasa said gently and sadly. Let us hope that no one in the East was aware of his death yet, and that his judgment was a matter for Sidre alone, as the man brave and sane enough to kill Roderick Urgul will have had 1,000 prayers offered against him by the priests and the Inquisition. Against their voices we will have happily offered our part Leon, that he be spared a place in the Six Hells and instead be a champion in death. Erim had seen Stepan praying each day at the shrines that they had passed. Perhaps that had been enough. A dozen faces flashed in front of her. Hope you all found the place of judgment. Perhaps you found it together. It was a nice thought, and she'd always been told that you walk the path of death all on your own. Erim frowned. Even here they hated that man. No point in pretending you know why when you don't. So, why did everyone hate Roderick Urger anyway? She asked as Penguin handed her a ball of hot venison stew. Josephus smiled.
Well, that all depends on who you talk to. In the Danians, in Tyria and in Anarthe, we remember him and his father and uncles and brothers for being amongst the wave of Inquisition priests who were behind the witch hunts of a decade ago. They sowed hate and suspicion throughout the West, resulting in the deaths of many innocents, and many of the guilty as well.
He looked away from Erin for just a moment, looking deliberately at Stepan. Stepan looked up from his stew and caught Josephus' eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. Stepan gave a slight incline of his head, and Josephus nodded before continuing.
Orphin, the Earl of Anather, was so enraged by the deaths of his subjects, particularly Argante, then the greatest witch of the Earth world, that he summoned up his vassals and was ready to declare war, even on the High King.
Erim knew that name at least. Argante, Stepan's mother, burned at the stake.
The Bull of Anather, they called him after that,
said Josephus with pride. Then with charging, Guerdon glanced at Stepan. Through his anger was too late to save your mother. They all glanced at Stepan now and made short bows in his direction. Stepan tapped his heart in acknowledgement. Or to have vengeance, sighed Corwin Bregain, his fox-head sigil blinking in the firelight. He had the Earls of Here and Abeuth with him, and Har Anather ready to close the eastern roads. But the big fuckers got out of the arid world by slipping south through the river. Green Guerdon shrugged. They may be big fuckers, but alas, they're not stupid. As you can plainly tell, the Inquisition is not held in the same esteem here in the West as it is in the country East, said Jurassic with an apologetic smile. We Danians and Tyrians have a long memory. There are few men west of Trews who will recall the priestly Urgors with fondness. We don't hold witchcraft in the same regard either, which is to say, so low. Quite the opposite. Wise women who are followers of the old religion are a part of our culture.
Well, for some of us, said Olormilly, his mouth full of stew, the divine king's got his hold here too. Our new lord, for example.
Well, most lords in truth, said Corwin. Oh, lords! Half the assembled circle sending ears into a general round of laughter. But what about back in Therapoli? Asked Erim.
Oh, that'd be taxes, said Goz.
Erim frowned, puzzled. Taxes? Penguin groaned.
Oh, don't get him started.
What? Said Goz defensively. It's true. Penguin returned to Erim and spoke conspiratorially.
Fees and taxes and debts are Goz's favorite fucking subject. Anyone tell you yet how 3 Penny got his name? You've been to Therapoli, right? Cost 3 pennies to enter the capital. Most other towns and cities will charge 6 pennies too. So one day Goz is at the gates of Newgate looking to enter, and he reaches into his pocket and all he's got is 3 pennies, so he tries to persuade the gate guards. If 3 pennies is good enough for Therapoli, it should be good enough for you. And when they say no, sorry, can't enter, he proceeds to stuff those 3 pennies down one of the guards' throats, and himself 3 months in the city dungeon until Thomas the Greener paid to get him out. May he find the underworld.
God bless and keep you, Thomas, said Goz, looking mournfully at the sky. A month per penny, thanks to him. Otherwise, they might have left me in rot. Josephus grinned at Goz.
As I recall, there was a young lady waiting in Newgate that precipitated said bad event.
Goz bristled and looked peeved for the reminder, but not too seriously. I was young and foolish. Fuck off. Who are you to pass judgment? And I'm telling you, the anger at the Urgors is about fucking taxes. Chapman laughed, waving at Goz to calm himself. Goz is much correct. At its heart, the general anger and discontent is over taxation, particularly in the East. The public temple in Therapoli has been charged with representing the poor and the common in the city. Well, throughout the kingdoms, really, for 200 years. Since the end of the Wars of the Throne Thief. The High King for Wen wasn't called the Wise for nothing.
Sire, make a king. Behold the man who perceives the future and is not afraid to shape it, said Josephus.
Erin wondered where the quote was from as the men around the circle nodded. Not only did Forwain the Wise manage to finally end 50 years of bloody fighting, but he put in place many of the laws and traditions that have managed to keep the peace ever since. The tournaments were his ideas, for example, to get everyone settling the differences in the arena of sport rather than the costly endeavor of war. And one of the things that Forwain realized was that the wars had been terrible on the commoners of the Middle Kingdoms, be they free folk or serf. There had been a number of peasant rebellions during the wars, and that was when the bandit knights of the Manon Mall started to really expand in number.
Blows you how the first of the Hemispian cities becoming true republics then, mused Penguin, rubbing his red beard. That scared the crap out of every sacred king of the Sun Court.
Sheba nodded. Aye. Forwain's solution was to put the high priest of the public temple in charge of representing the voice of the poor and dispossessed at court, so that when a decision was being made about taxes or fees or trade or labor or crime and punishment, that the vox populara, the voice of the people, could be heard. And it's worked reasonably well, I suppose. Let me guess. Until Roderick Urgor, said Erin. Aye. The Urgors are a priestly family, have been for centuries. They are old-school traditionalists, and the role of the public temple has been a sticking point for them ever since Forwain gave it its new mission. They've always thought it undermined the foundation of the divine king cult, the absolute divine right of kings, as the sworn and direct vassals of Islik, the divine king, to rule in his name.
Or to pass along the right to rule to their vassals,
said Pyle, looking happy to get a word in. Old Emerald smiled at his fellow warden. Indeed, there's a compact in the code of the Divine King. You're the subject of one of his vassals, aye. But as a subject, you are supposed to be protected and watch over, he said, pride in his voice. That's our job, in fact, to ask as wardens to Girdif on the part of the lord of the town, watching against threats from the walls and the bell board. And no doubt a great service to the common folk hereabouts. But who gets to decide what that promise of protection means? Asked Shepard. With a public temple, the people were supposed to have a voice to say a thing. No, wait, that doesn't help us, that hurts us. But to the Orgors, negotiating the High King's laws and edicts is akin to admitting that his laws and edicts do not emerge directly from the heavens. It calls into question the entire basis for Divine King cult and culture. So when the Urgers managed to get Roderick appointed to be High Priest of the public temple, well, that was their chance. And ever since, he's basically refused to do anything other than approve the decisions of the king's court, even going so far as to actively encourage measures that hurt the poor of the city and the poorest of the landed tenants. Girls grumble. Taxes and land fees have crept up slowly every year that he's been high priest. A penny here and a penny there. A nick and a cut, and sure, you're bleeding all over. Then there was the special tax of 64. Half the kingdom were up in arms about that one, even the nobles. And then a major poll tax increase in 69. And he didn't say shit. So he got blamed for that, and rightly so, as far as I'm concerned. And now it's about debt too. Fucking usury. It's all about loans at interest. He slipped a spoonful of stew in his mouth. Loans? Asked Erin. What, borrowing money? Josephus cut in before Goes would swallow his food and vent. Tenant farmers and free city landowners sometimes have to borrow money from their noble landlords or from the banking houses, particularly at the start of the planting seasons, or they're buying seed and grain and tools from their landlords or the big trading consortiums and merchant houses on loan at inflated prices and at interest. And the Urgors, who have made a substantial side business of usury, have been instrumental in the passage of several edicts from the High King's court that allow lenders to charge the interest owed for a loan essentially at their whim, as well as impose fees for some made-up reason or another. If you can't pay, you fall into debt bondage. Your labor must go to pay back the debt, which just gets bigger with every added fee. You wind up working for free, and it gets harder and harder to pay off what you owe. Pony nodded. It's why Blackjack Hardy is now an outlaw in the woods, with 100 swords at his back, and why his brother Red Tom almost followed after. Them and their crews are almost all fleeing debts, or some charge related to their debts. And the Goers too, Smylie and Moran and their households. They're Flint's cousins, aren't they, Flint? Asked Goes, glancing at Flint next to him. It took a moment for Flint to register that someone was speaking to him. What? Yes, quite true. Well, second cousin, said Flint faintly with a smile. He went back to staring at the burning braziers. Gaze stared for a moment at Flint, then turned back to the rest and nodded vigorously. Then to top it all off, Roderick Urgor, he'll pass a law last year that says your debt loans can be passed to your surviving family after you die. In the big Middle Kingdoms, we say we don't have slaves, not like the Empire or the Palatians. But nowadays, that's what you went up. Once you owe the landlords and the merchants too much. That aren't just piece of commoners and tenant farmers. It started Porlos, rightful Earl of Aurillac, on the path to his rebellion and to exile. Erin turned to Shepard. So why the fuck were all those people so angry in the street when they found out he died? Why weren't they celebrating instead? Shepard shrugged. Many did celebrate in the city that night. But there's also many that are still the faithful, the true believers, even amongst the poor that are getting hurt the most. To them, it was a high priest of the temple, a representative of the Sun Court. He was infallible, just like the High King is infallible, just like the great barons are infallible, because they speak for their King of heaven and of earth. Jurasa smiled gently. For the true believers, better to be poor and suffer now and gain the gates of heaven when you're dead, than to bitch and moan and decry the priests and the High King and wind up at an eternity in the six hells for your present troubles. Now, who amongst us is to say that they are wrong in their fears? Erin paused for a moment. She thought about the hell she was going to. Yeah, I guess eternity is a long time if you fuck it up, she said quietly, and then she dug into her stew. After they were mostly done eating, and bottles of wine and brandy spirits had appeared, old Emerald turned to Stepjohn.
So why did Lord Arduin lead you into the Bell Mall?
Stepjohn slipped a last forkful of fig pie into his mouth and chewed quickly while he tried to answer. Well, he swallowed and cleared his throat. I suppose word will get out eventually, so you might as well hear it from us. We were seeking the Barrow of Azharat. Turas and his crew knew, of course, but this was fresh tidings to Flint, who had been insensible during his rescue, and the wardens, and even in some ways to Gauze. They all went still, starting at Stepan. Flint seemingly focused and aware of the world for the first time in days. Old Emerald finally broke the long silence.
I have not known you long, Blackheart, but by word, deed, and reputation you do not strike me as a fool. And I did not think you were the kind to lie and play your fellows for the fool either, he said softly.
No lie, Master Emerald, said Stepan. We had 'em up, fair sure that it was real, and it led us into the Bell Mall, to a barrow untouched by human hand in centuries. We opened it and entered, and afterwards put the bodies of 17 of our companions in the funeral pyre. There's 2 or 3 or 4 that we lost on the trail in or out as well, so 21 all told, all dead to chase a legend. Old Emerald's eyes were narrow slits.
Was it his barrow?
Stepan levelly met his gaze across the braziers. Yes, it was. There was a collective exhaltation of breath around the circle.
Queen of Heaven, help us, said Emerald.
The old man closed his eyes and rubbed his face with his gnarled hands. Fuck me, whispered Corwin. Stepan gestured for calm. The spirit of Azharat was bound and trapped by one of our companions, and the ancient sorcerer king should be beyond the reach of those in his cult who would seek his return, he said. I've already spoken to Lady Majessia, and she and Lady Daria have performed readings this day, and his spirit is hidden away from the world, invisible to the wheel of fortune.
All well and good, but still, Blackheart, you bloody fool! You've stirred up a heap of trouble for us,
Old Emerald said angrily.
The Azharites will be seeking his spirit and his treasures, and if they are denied them after all this time, they will seek revenge, and we will be the ones to take the brunt of the rage. And all for what? All for nothing, for a pile of the dead, including Lord Arduin. Unless...
Emerald froze, staring at Stepan's calm, even expression. He looked around the circle. Half of Duras's men could barely conceal their smiles. A dawning comprehension started to pass over Emerald's face, and the old man's eyes widened.
Unless... Did you... Hera, Queen of Heaven, did you find Gladringer?
Stepan looked down, and Erin knew that really he was looking at her. There will be those who already know this amongst our enemies, and so once more you might as well hear the news from us. He looked up at old Emerald. Yes, we did. There was a long silence.
Bullshit, said the Rook brothers in unison. No way, you lot have found the sword of the High Kings, finished Barrow Rook.
Surely this is just a jest, said Corwin.
And a cruel one at that, said Pyle.
But old Emerald said nothing, staring at Stepan. Durasa stirred and spoke. Blackheart speaks the truth. We are alive today only because Gladringer, wielded in the sure hands of a stout-hearted warrior, brought down a Galadriel within the Devil's Tower. Else likely we will have there perished. Josephus leaned forward.
We bear witness, friends. Twice it struck a blade of hell, and once the foul heart of the Galadriel, and each time a great bell sounded out over the earth, just as was described in a great epic of that age, de Numis Virmis Bacillus, the last of the Dragon Kings.
Old Emerald looked back and forth from Josephus to Stepan.
When was this exactly?
Josephus answered.
Mid-afternoon, the 16th of Green Moon, the 10th of Ascensium.
Queen of Heaven, breathed Emerald. I heard those bell strokes when I was out on patrol, coming down a Tyrian trail, like the pearls of distant thunder through the trees. I thought it odd, but it didn't. I didn't think further on what it meant after the echoes died out.
I thought I had been dreaming, my mind playing tricks on me, said Goz, staring open-mouthed at Erin. Flint and Corwin looked at Goz and realized he wasn't looking at Stepan. They stared at Erin, and the sword tugged at her hip. She shifted awkwardly under their gaze.
Can we see it? Said Pyle.
Like old Emerald, he was looking at Stepan.
Please, show it to us. It ain't up to him to say, said Corwin with a smile.
Emerald and the other wardens looked at him in confusion. A small smile played on Stepan's face. No, it is not. He turned and looked at Erin, and then they all did, following his gaze. Erin sat frozen for a moment, unable to look anyone in the eye. She took a deep breath. Oh well, fuck it. Half of them have already seen me stab one of them are happy with it. She shifted in her seat and slowly unsheathed the sword in one long, smooth motion. She held it out for them to see. One hand cupped under the blade, the other under the pommel. The watered steel glinted in the firelight. She was suddenly acutely aware of the frayed grip, the old style of the pommel and guard and shape of the blade. It is not much to look at, she said apologetically. Old Emerald was whispering a folk charm under his breath, his eyes in a squint.
It's everything to look at,
he said finally, awe in his voice and a tear trembling down one cheek.
There's starfire shining in that blade, and 5 full riven runes I count, the sword rune, and more shown.
He could barely continue, his voice fluttering with emotion.
And the death rune, and the rune of strength, and the rune of victory, finished Josephus quietly. 5 of the Labira Gramata. There may only be 2 or 3 other swords in the history of the world that have had that many runes enchanted in their full power upon them. It is a masterpiece.
Old Emerald let out a loud whoop, startling everyone else, and then laughed quietly.
Oh, will the wonders never cease? Gladringer back in the world. And here I was thinking we were to talk about what to do with the men of Dunarden.
Ah, said Stepan, his eye glinting. But we are, for all these things are connected. He indicated to Erin that she should put the sword away, and she did happily, and somehow the world seemed a bit darker, more back to normal when the sword was safely sheathed. By all appearances, the nameless maneuver to have Goz and his crew enter the Devil's Tower, presumably with their deaths as the goal, and almost got the Lamb and his crew in the bargain, thanks to my concerns about Goz. They did so because Threepenny was onto something, a possible conspiracy amongst the rivermen of the House of Colvane and the men of Dunarden to smuggle captives kidnapped and disappeared in the Danias up the river and into the woods of the Asharites.
Old Emerald grunted. Aye, Josephus told us that part earlier. The scenario makes sense, though I'm loath to think such ill thoughts about folk from Argyrtif or from Dunarden. But we all know the Namelets can be anyone amongst us. There have been long rumors of a secret trade. I admit we've been too busy guarding the paths of the world against the threat in front of us to think about the threat behind us.
One thing to know it in theory, and another to have the nameless exposed among your neighbors. Shepard leaned forward. I think you are right to summarize that the Asharites will be eager for revenge when they learn that Asharad is beyond their reach. And doubly so, for they must know that Gladringer has been rediscovered. They will come at you hard, and in all likelihood not too far in the future. They will use their agents here, in the open fields and villages of Upper Dania and the hinterlands, both to track the sword and to alert their fellow nameless throughout the Middle Kingdoms. I must return to Therapoli, for I have duties I must attend to there. But someone must learn and disrupt their plans, break their lines of communication and supply, and in the end take the fight to them. We can't be passive and let the Asharites determine the course of events.
So you're headed back to Therapoli?
Old Emerald said, his voice marked with a touch of skepticism. He looked at Erim.
Is that where you're taking the sword, lad?
Erim steered. She'd already told Stepan she wouldn't be returned to the capital, but she hadn't really thought about where to go next. She hesitated a moment, then spoke low and husky. I'm not taking it anywhere. This is happening to you because of us, because of this. She tapped the sword at her side. So I'll be here with you if you'll have me. No one said anything. No one needed to. Emerald turned back to Stepan, a more satisfied demeanor upon him.
What will you have us do?
Stepan took a deep breath. First, confirm who amongst the men of Dunarden and the house of Culvain are involved in trading with the Asharites. Sir Markham the Dune, who holds Dunarden for El Geller. Are he and his knights and wardens involved? We have to know. Track the movements of the Asharite warbands, see when and where they begin to marshal their forces, and alert those you can trust, the Tyrian lords, the free men of the walls, any amongst your kin and kith here south of the line. Can you trust Lord Naeras? Can you trust the Earl? Old Emerald ran his hand to the salt and pepper bird.
We will need hard proof. The new lord is a good man, a man of honor, and he takes his duties seriously. He grunted and sighed, perhaps too seriously. If I read him right, he won't send his knights against his own vassals and subjects without the proof against them. The impropriety of the act would offend him, and dare not raise the issue with the Earl, or at the court of the dying king if Lord Nereus does not believe our case. So if it is just a hunch and we don't have the proof, we have to do it on our own, with Blackjack and the other bandit chiefs, or maybe Lord Elfram and Elfir of the Tyrians, and just hope and pray Lord Naeras never hears words of it, else we'll all be outlawed ourselves.
Durasan nodded. I cannot claim to speak for them, but the Tyrian lords will join us. We Tyrians are born hating the Asharites. It is in our blood. Shepan smiled. I would accept that old Earl Elfram will not pass up an excuse to wage war against his eternal foes. He looked around at each man in turn. Then if you can, strike first, with or without Naeras' blessing. Adunarden and whoever amongst the rivermen are acting as their eyes and ears and suppliers, and then into the Kestrel March and the Utherwold. Take the fight to the Asharites before they can strike out of the woods and into the heartland of the western Danias to take their revenge. There was broad silence around the crackling blazers. Finally, Green Weird in sight, adjusting his arm and his leg. Always the easy things with you, ain't it, Blackheart? Shepan shrugged at the laughter. They stayed awake, sitting around the braziers long into the night, as the sparks from the dying coals in the braziers floated up to meet the stars. Erim listened as the others debated who would be trusted and who was suspect, and a flood of names went by, local lords and lordlings, knights and their squires, merchants and great land tenants, and bandit chieftains and crazed hermits living in the walls. She had occasionally asked about a name, and then be regaled with stories from Josephus or Emerald or Penguin or Covain or one of the others about a family and its history. Eventually, while the others were deep discussing whether Elfram Tirthane, Lord of Andamaloch and vassal to Earl Geller of Hartford, would eventually make official his own claim to the title of Earl and claim the Tira world as his earldom, Shepard had turned to her. "I leave soon, in the next day or two," Shepard said, his voice low. "I have a few things to do on the road back to Therapoli." "Of course you do," said Erin with a small smile. He'd already slipped down into Girdif twice that day without explanations. "Chances are, once I'm in Therapoli, I won't be able to return right away. Unless something's changed while we were gone, and I doubt it has, then the Grand Duke will be preparing for his summer campaign against the rebel heir, and I will be assigned to his quarters the moment the court realizes I'm back in the city." Erin squinted at the braziers. "So you'll be off squiring in the Manon Mall while we're fighting the Asharites?" "Probably." "Will you be okay?" She looked around at the rough men around the braziers, laughing and talking. Durace caught her glance and smiled at her before turning back to the general conversation. She looked at Stepan, saw the look of mild concern on his face. "Yeah, I'll be okay here. I'm carrying fucking Gladringer, aren't I?" She talked all playful false bravado. Stepan snorted. "That likely be what gets you killed. It makes you a target. Duras and Goza I can vouch for at least, if not the others. Keep them alive if you can, and they'll do the same for you. I will send messages to the temple here, and the priestess will hold them for you and read them to you or find you if they are urgent. And you can ask them to send messages from me to Therapoli, or even into the Manon Mall once summer is upon us." She nodded, and they turned their attention to the general conversation.
"And if we have to, we can reach out to King Derek and the men of the watchtowers," Josephus was saying. "He will no doubt take interest if the Asharites steer and strike behind the Hall of Fortius down the river valley. As a watchtower king, he is not beholden to the king of Dania or his vassals, and has the freedom to act on his own."
Durasen nodded. "Aye, perhaps the watchtowers can send knights north from Miser, and come down into the Uther Wold from the west, and trap them between us. King Derek will be at the Tournament of Flowers. We can aim to speak to him there."
"And someone should tell Siarlock," said Pyle Garthing.
There was a general murmur of assent around the braziers.
"Sure, if we can fucking find him," said Goz.
"Who's Siarlock?" whispered Erin to Penguin.
"He's a batshit crazy old wizard," he whispered back.
"Of course she is," she said with a nod. "Fantastic. Exactly what every doing mission needs."